Excited to welcome Nagoya Diamond Dolphins head coach Shawn Dennis. Coach Dennis has coached in the Japanese Professional Basketball League called the B League since 2017. The 2016 Australian NBL Coach of the Year with the Townsville Crocodiles has considerable experience coaching in Australia and New Zealand prior to his first coaching position in Japan with the Shiga Lakestars. Coach Dennis was previously the New Zealand national women's basketball team head coach and won a New Zealand NBL championship with the Hawke's Bay Hawks and the league's Coach of the Year honor. Coach Dennis, welcome to the podcast.
Fantastic to be here. I'm actually a little bit nervous with all the great people you've had on this podcast, and getting to listen to it. It's, I love listening to it. So now to be a guest is actually quite an honor. So thank you so much for having me on.
Wow. Thank you for being here. And thanks for saying that. And so many fun things to be able to talk about. And, just an incredible career in coaching that covers every aspect of coaching. And people are curious about what the profession looks like overseas. They can look at your resume, can't they?
They can. I've been a lifer from sleeping on, the hardwood on a blow-up mattress, coaching kids, to, I think, like every coach that ends up being a career coach has somewhere on the line had to do all those things. But, it's all part of the journey, and it's actually a lot of fun with the people you meet over the time.
So one of the interesting things that came up is when you moved from Australia to Japan to coach, it came up in an article that I read, and it talked about you completely rethinking your image as a coach. And I just want you to talk about that a little bit, because I think that lesson is so important for coaches to understand that regardless of age, experience, et cetera, you can change.
Yeah, it was big, it's because you move into a completely different culture. And when I went from Australia to New Zealand, I was a younger coach. I was pretty volatile. I didn't deal with players making, many errors very well. And I think my first response was to use an aggressive approach. But people really thought I wouldn't survive in New Zealand, and I did, and I didn't change too much. But as it went on, and then I moved to Japan, I found very quickly such a different culture. And when you got angry or aggressive in your response to the way the players were behaving, they would shut down on you completely. And I realized very quickly that, hey, hang on a minute, I can't do that. I've got to make change to me and how I deal with things. And I'd been reading a lot anyway, because I think the youth of today are so different from when I was a player, 30 odd years ago. I was brought up in a very aggressive environment where it was almost autocratic, and, your coach yelled at you. You didn't think anything of it. You shut up and put up and just got on with the job. But today, and I think it's right, that the players will ask questions. They want to know the why. They want the instruction, and you've got to earn their respect. And that was something I realized. And so I did a lot of study after my first year as a head coach in Shiga on the education system in Japan. And I realized very quickly that we're bringing these kids into an environment where we're asking them to talk, we're asking them to make decisions, we're asking them to do all these things that culturally they haven't been encouraged to do those things. So I was like, okay, we've got to completely change the way we're approaching this, and start to educate and give the kids the confidence that it's okay to speak. It's okay to not always follow the coach's advice, and so we changed. One thing I changed was, and I've seen a few other coaches do similar, is we don't have any rules. We have guidelines, because the Japanese are so good at following rules. But what you come to understand in the game of basketball is that sometimes the rule doesn't fit the situation, the environment, that scenario that's in front of you. You're actually going to have to make your own decision and maybe go against what the rule says, because that's what's called for in that moment. And so we changed that to guidelines. I changed my approach to a more questioning approach, which is still difficult because it takes a while for the local players to want to actually give an answer, because they think you're trying to catch them out and get them wrong, and teaching them that, no, I'm doing this so I know whether you've got the information that I'm trying to give to you. And it takes a little longer than normal, but what I've found is it becomes a much better learning environment, and the lessons that the players learn as it goes on tend to stick, and then you start to see that just start to flow into the game. And it's a lot of fun, and it's taught me so much about me as a person, and where do you go with this, and what do you do, how do you go from this to this, and I found that the players are much more receptive to the information, and really trying to do the right thing, and then just encouraging them to keep trying and try things, and it's okay when you don't quite get it right, and rather than getting down on yourself, what did you learn in this moment, and with the language barrier at times it's difficult, but my players are getting better, and I think I've become a far better coach for it, that's for sure.
Well, that was my question. And do you feel like you're a better coach, and do you feel more comfortable coaching this way?
I actually do. It's challenging at times because I'm a passionate guy, and
of course,
when I got this new job in Nagoya, one of the things the general manager said to me, you're quite animated sometimes on the sideline, you get quite angry, and I said, look, it's not anger, it's passion. I said, I love this game I've been involved with since I was made the decision to leave Australian rules football and focus on basketball at 19. I'm 56 now, so for 37 years this has been my life, and I love watching the players do well, and I love those when you see a player have that light bulb moment when the realization of what we're trying to achieve, and why you're pushing them so hard. And I have a player right now, Ray Parker Jr., whose father was a legend in the Philippines, and in the last 2 weeks I've seen that light bulb moment of this kid. He's very, very talented, but needed pushing and coaching, and he allowed some of the things that we were doing, specifically me, to draw away from his confidence, and we finally got him now to where he now understands what I'm doing. I'm just trying to make him become the player that he should be, and can be, and wants to be. And so that's going to take me pushing a little bit, and at times I'm going to confront you, but we've gotten through that hurdle, and in the last couple of games he's been just outstanding, and you just see he's a different person now. He's understanding it, and that's, I think, made me a far better person, not just a coach. And now the players feel more comfortable coming to me, and that's a big thing for me. And you hear a lot of long-time coaches talk about those relationships. When you get a phone call from an ex-player asking you about life, and that's really, for me, the most pleasing moments of the coaching profession.
Yeah, there's no question. Those are some great moments. And thanks for sharing that introspection as well. And it's going to lead us into some of the things we're going to talk about more specifically, which is one of them is improving your timeout effectiveness. And you already talked a little bit about how some players, obviously in Japan, they look at things differently. So I'm sure that this has been shaped even more by your experiences there. But let's maybe just start with improving your timeout effectiveness. What are what's one of the most important things we should consider?
Look, I think the most important thing you should consider, and I often talk to coaches, and there's something I've tried before, is how much information is actually going to be retained by the players. And a great little test you can do is have the players in a locker room before practice and give a pre-game speech. And then after the warm-up, ask the players some of the specifics of that pre-game speech and see how much they actually remember. And you'll find it's not that much, and you see some coaches whiteboards before a game, and there's you're just like, oh my gosh, it's an essay. How in Lord's name are they going to remember all this information? And I remember years ago, I heard a coach say he did 3 things: 1 defense, 1 offense, and 1 general thing. And I started that approach, and I've even found that sometimes that's too much information. And so for me, going into a timeout, I'm at a stage now where it's virtually one thing. What's the most important thing right now that we need to talk about coming into this timeout. And now if I've called it, I've probably got a specific reason. It might be a defensive reason. It might be an offensive situation, whatever it might be. But certainly there's only one main point now. And I think the players tend to remember that. And then I might ask the players a question. If it was a defensive reason, okay, what do you want to do on offense here? And, something along those lines. Occasionally you get a little bit grumpy and you might, hey, we need to pick this up. But I've found that that's becoming ineffective too, and that's hard to control. But the most effective thing is, what is the most important thing right now for the game? And, that's the only thing I believe you've got time to do. And in Japan, you get a minute timeout and they are sticklers that it is only 60 seconds. And I've got to cut that in half because everything I say has to be interpreted. So I don't have time. I have maybe 30 seconds. And then if you take 10 seconds to quickly ask your assistant coaches what they think, I'm down to 20 seconds maybe. So I've found it to be much more effective. Okay, we want to change this on the defense. Or, hey, what's going on with the pick and roll right now? We're a bit late on that. Is there a reason? And, the player, let's pick that up and get back to doing the way we talk about. And, and I found the players are starting to respond a lot more effectively with that. But it's just knowing exactly what the reason is and not being angry, which is not easy. And because there's times where you're really frustrated, but you can't let that boil over.
Yeah, it reminds me of the notion of do you want to be impressive or effective? And when we have all those things, or we have all these great speeches, all these different things, you may seem impressive, but is it effective? And that's what it comes back to. And one thing that I love that you've shared as well is that you like to have your timeouts filmed. Now, I'm curious about that process. Is that all year, or is that sometimes, or is it just to evaluate?
It's sometimes, but it's to evaluate a number of things. You watch some timeouts and you see a player drinking his water bottle and looking over there. So you can't. I know, reading some articles recently that some people don't, and culturally too, this is something I had to learn in New Zealand. I was always brought up, must have eye contact, eyes on. But I've learned very quickly in New Zealand that in the Maori culture, it's disrespectful to make eye contact with someone who's seen a higher status than you when they're talking. And I didn't realize that. And I got angry at a player one time. Hey, give me your eyes right now. And then later they say, oh, coach, we probably should have told you this, but that's a cultural thing there. He was listening and focused. So one is are the players paying attention? But a big one is for me, was I effective in my timeout? Was the information I gave appropriate to the moment in the game? Because there's no doubt sometimes what you see at that moment with the eye test is not necessarily what's actually happening, and one of the things I've gotten big on with my group is sometimes we see somebody, not make a defensive coverage, but until you watch the film, the reason he didn't get his defensive coverage was because 2 phases before, this player A didn't do his job, and then this guy's had to come from a wrong position to try and help player A back 2 phases before. And sometimes you don't see that in the game. So you've got to be very careful that yelling at this guy or getting on this guy for not being there when it was this guy's fault over here. And I call that the ripple effect. Don't be the pebble in the pond. So when a pebble goes into the pond, there's a ripple and it hits the shores somewhere. Those waves will go somewhere. So if you're that pebble causing a ripple, you need to fix what you're doing. And we try to look for that pebble that hits the pond so that we make sure we get it right. And sometimes I'll ask, the assistant, why didn't he get that help? And I'll say, oh, so-and-so broke down. So then we can go in the timeout and go, hey, you got to make sure you get that pick and roll defense right. You can't be late on that coverage. Otherwise we break down over here. And that's another reason why I like to film it. Did we give the right information? Was my demeanor a positive demeanor or a negative demeanor? Because I believe I have to evaluate myself the hardest. And that's something that I'm really hard on myself first and foremost. Was there something I can do better? And I feel the timeouts is a very crucial situation. The end of games, were my instructions clear? If we didn't run the play that we drew up properly, because sometimes in a game as a coach, particularly late game, you might have a play that you've practiced for that moment, but you notice that the coverage of the defense is not going to allow that play to work. So we can just throw this little wrinkle in, so was my information right to do that, to throw that wrinkle so the players could then go out there and do that at that moment.
So something you alluded to, and I want us to build on, is this concept of reading the emotion of your team, coming into the timeout, during the timeout, et cetera. And just talk to us about some of the strategies or some of the cues that you use to be able to read the emotion of your team.
Well, one of the first thing, is reading the body language of the players coming in. Are they hanging their heads? What's the mood of it? Is one player, angry at something? Why is he angry? What's he down about? Or one of my pet hates. When I got into coaching, one of the things that I did was I looked back at my playing career, the coaches I had, and the different things players would do. And one of the things that I noticed a lot in my playing career was players would come in trying, we've got to stay positive, or we've got to do this. And they were normally actually weren't doing very well. And I felt it was a way of sometimes players doing things to deflect responsibility and try and make out that if the coach now comes in like angry, then he's the one being negative. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. And so if a player does those things, sometimes I'll ask them a question of, what do you mean by that? What's the purpose of this situation? But a big one I look for is, is my team flattened down? Well, then I can't jump and be angry if they look down. I've got to find a way to lift them back up. Now that might be making a substitution, making sure that I give a very solution-based information so that there's direct. Sometimes it's, hey, we just need, hey, we're getting great shots here. Why are you hanging your heads? They're the shots we talk about. But are we tagging up? We use the Aaron Fern tag up system, but are we getting the tag up done? Because we always talk about, we never want anyone to second guess their shot. So are we tagging up to give that player the confidence to shoot? Oh, no, we could do better than that. Okay, well, then let's pick that up, fellas. Let's get that done so our best shooters feel confident to keep shooting, because we don't want them to second guess themselves at any time. So you're looking for those types of things. Is there anger amongst the group? What's causing this? Why aren't we together right now? And I really try hard to read that. And over the years, really understanding that people are emotional and trying to. And particularly in Japan, they have the thing where they say they read the air, and, you've got to be really, mostly because they avoid conflict. So they tend to react to what they feel are people's emotions and body language. So that's a really important thing. And I talk a lot to the, new foreign players that come in. You've got to be very mindful of this. If you're too angry, they will shut down on you. You've got to have some empathy at times and make sure you back up any anger with the reasons why, etc. And that's the biggest thing we're looking for when they come into a timeout.
Great stuff. Great depth, Coach. Thanks for sharing those insights. And obviously the process is challenging, but it's such a necessary part of it. And I'm curious also with timeouts, do you allow assistants or players to talk in the timeout once you go into the timeout?
Absolutely. I'm one person. I don't have all the answers, and the day I think I have all the answers, then it's probably time to retire, hang up the clipboard and move on to something else. And, I'm really fortunate. My point guard is extremely intelligent, and he's often 2 or 3 plays ahead of everyone else in the team, and sometimes including myself. So if he's got something to say, I want to listen, and the only time I say is, if I am talking, just let me finish and then you can have your say. And there has been times too where an assistant coach will come to me and say, hey, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, well, okay, you tell the team that. Then it's you've got the information. You get in there and let them know this information. And, and probably one of the greatest times I've seen a coach do that was when I was with the Tochigi Brex my first year in Japan. And we had a situation, the last play, we make a bucket, we make the championship game. And we've got, I think there's around about 3 seconds left on the clock. And the assistant coach came, Wiesman was our head coach, who's the head coach of Gunma now. And the assistant coach, Onzai, is now the head coach of the team that won the championship. He came and said, I've got the perfect play. And Tom just said to him, go ahead and draw it. So at a pinnacle moment, he gave the responsibility to our assistant coach. And the play worked perfectly. It wasn't new. It was very simple. The players did it perfectly. Ryan Rossley hit the basket. We go on to win the championship, the very first championship of the B League. And, and I think as a head coach, you have to trust people that they have good information, and you build that trust. And in that moment, Tom trusted Onzai, and it was a great lesson to all of us about having trust in the people around you. And that's a really important part as a head coach.
It's great stuff. And you mentioned tagging up earlier, and I know there's a lot of coaches that we have an immersion video on tagging up from Aaron Fern. I know a lot of coaches have used it or tried it or experimented with it or talked to someone about it. So maybe give us your takeaways from having used it and how it's effective for your team.
Look, I was always, Aaron, I think when he talked about the Perth Wildcats in New Zealand being such great offensive rebounders. Well, one of my jobs at Perth was the defensive transition. And I was always a triangle on the boards, get your dogger on the free throw line as that area to tap the ball out to and get a safety to the center circle. And, I was a big driver of that at Perth with Rob Beveridge was our head coach at the time. And I'd always done that. And my teams had always been good offensive rebounding teams, even when I was a head coaching. And then I saw what Fernie did with the tag up, and I loved it immediately. I was like, this is perfect. And and I've seen people say, oh, but you give up. Now, right now, our defensive transition this year in the B League is one of the best in the league. And we use the tag up. The players are still learning it because it's big habits to change. And the toughest one, as he talks about, is when that is being on the high side of the defender and pushing him towards the baseline. It's getting the players to really fight that urge, particularly when a player shoots a three-point shot from the top of the key and he knows it's off and his instinct is to go and chase the ball, and he can't do that. And when that happens, you can almost guarantee you're going to give up a contested layup at the other end, and unless you get the ball. But I think I love it because it allows you to apply immediate pressure. Once the players get the concept, and we talk about it a lot, they've fallen in love with it, and they really get it now, and they go, hey, hang on, this is actually really good. And the biggest fight I've had is with my foreign players. They're like, but coach, I'm worried about when I shoot, I've got to tag up. I was like, you don't need to worry about that. My general rule is the shooter, he doesn't have to tag. He just gets back. And, now the players, but the more you drill it, like anything in head coaching, if you want to have an emphasis, then you have to do it every time you practice. You have to demand it. You have to set it as one of your standards. And even when we're doing 5-on-0, the players are yelling tag up when someone shoots. If we're doing a conceptual shooting drill, and we might only have one guy shooting because we want to practice. There's a lot of times you do some conceptual shooting and then you have some assistant coaches throw so everyone gets a shot. Well, sometimes we don't do that because we want the two non-shooters to think tag up. And the players will be yelling it from the sidelines. And we've found now that we're very hard to fast break against, and as Aaron said, you're set. And if you do your job, then there's pressure. And, when we get it right, we're really good. A few times we haven't got it very right. And, one game against Shiga this year, we got it really wrong, and, they belted us by 30, and they're a fast break team. But when I viewed the video after, I realized we weren't on the high side enough, and we weren't turning that into a 50-50 contest. And then we were too often trying to steal the ball on the rebound. And of course they just turned and ran by us. And so that's against the principle of what it's about. And making those small adjustments, I think, is the real key. But I'm a believer in it. And, if you want to be a pressure defensive team, I think it's the most perfect thing that you can have. And we are about that. because we want to play at tempo. So we need to, particularly teams that want to slow you down, you need to be up and trying to force them into a bit of a tempo game. So that's very helpful for that, which is actually very different to the way Aaron played the game. Yeah. It was much more grinding.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to hear that, and definitely the advantages for obviously, we talked about defensive transition, but I think, another end of the floor that we don't think about is how does it affect your overall team's rebounding philosophy or effort? And I'm imagining, based on what you're talking about, it's not just the one side of the floor that they develop this rebound mentality. It applies to both sides, doesn't it?
It does. And to be honest, with this team this year, it's a real culture we're having to change, and it's taking longer than I hoped. One of the deficiencies when I came in here was that this team was the second worst possession team in the league last year. And, we're trying to change that culture, and it's taking longer, but it's improving slowly but surely, but it's whereas when I did it at Shiga, we were second in rebounding, first in rebounding over the 4 years I had there, were in the top 3 every year. And they seem to really want to be part of that a lot quicker. But this group, for whatever reason, it's taking a little bit longer. But there's no doubt there's still been times where we've won a couple of games where the rebounding is the possession game, because that's such a big part of my philosophy is possession game. That we've been able to win that and then get crucial possessions at crucial times. And you can see the players now starting to click and go, oh, okay, I'm getting this. And we had a moment of practice yesterday where we had I think there was about 35 seconds left on the clock of a scrimmage, and one team got 3 offensive rebounds, and I just said, hey, what was that? How did they end up winning that? And all the players said possession game. We got the possession, and we knew that was what was going to win that moment. And, sometimes it's not the X's and O's, it's that factor of a part of what you do in winning possession. And I think I'm a big believer in it, and I still think it leads to more winning. And when we won the championship in Tochigi, we averaged 10 more shots a game than our opposition. That's hard to beat. Then I believe your shooting percentages don't come into it as much. So if you have a poor shooting night, you're still going to be in the game because of weight of numbers. And I really believe in weight of numbers. Then those nights you do shoot the ball well, you normally win by 20 plus. It's a comfortable win, but you're always in the game no matter what.
Cool stuff. And great to get that out there. AaronFernBasketball.com for coaches that want to go check out more of that information. AaronFernBasketball.com. Coach, I love so much of the phrasing and the terminology you use. And one of them you talk about, and I want you to expand on just a little bit, is the D4 principles. Maybe just summarize them quickly for us, and then we can get into each individual one.
For sure. The D4 principles, the phrase D4 principles was something I coined. Now, I don't know if I'd heard it somewhere. Sometimes you watch and read and listen to so much over the years, sometimes you forget where it comes from. But
we can all relate to that, Coach.
Yeah, you just, it's what's funny. I run this drill I call 3-2-1, where team goes down 2-on-1, comes back 3-on-2, and and I adapted over the years, and I tell people about it, and I'd say, look, I'm sure someone showed me this one day, but this is what I've done with it. 20 years later, I joined my old head coach, Tom Wisman, in Tochigi as an assistant coach. And sure enough, when I was a player, that was where I did it. And, he'd done it. And he taught me the D4 principles, which are drive, drift, drag, dive. And so I took a drive, drift, drag, dive, and I went, I'll just call that the D4 principles. And then the players, I can just yell out, hey, D4 principles. And, I'd always been big on receiver principles and movement off the ball. One of the things that the NBA did with its global, the way it went so global, everything became ball-oriented, one-on-one, all, individuals that are all about the ball, all about, but not every player on your team is going to be able to do that. And I first came across the receiver principles in around about 2005. And in 2006, I was very lucky. to be an advanced scout for the New Zealand Tall Blacks in Japan at the World Championships. And I got to watch Argentina and Lithuania in particular, and the way they moved without the ball. In Argentina, were unbelievable that, Fabricio Alberto was so good at just getting into that dunker spot and then wheeling around and getting into the right spots. And Scola would get, make these amazing cuts. And I started to really research the receiver principles a lot more. And over time, I developed my own theories on it. And then I saw this drive, drift, drag, dive. And I thought, that's perfect. And how can we expand on that and teach the players, And so now my whole thing from an offensive perspective is we just want to create an advantage. And once the advantage is created, it's all about the D4 principles. And the number one golden rule or guideline, if you like, in the D4 principles is never let one guard two. So if you're in a position where one help defender can technically guard the both of you on the first kick out, then you need to move. Okay, so what can you do, right? So the first thing we talk about is driving the ball, and the ball can be driven on dribble penetration or pass penetration. Right? Now, once the ball is driven, where do you go from there? And it's all dependent on what the defense does. I can give you some basic movements, but I can't tell you where to go. You have to respond to what the defense does. So that's where the drift, the dive, and the drag come into it. Right? So the drift is pretty simple. Everyone knows the drift. You drift to the corners. And the general rule is the ball comes towards you, you have a choice of drifting or come for a handoff, depending on what your defender does. Right? The dive, we have a general guideline. If you see the back of your player's head, then you must dive. Right? Or, if there's a drive off a pick and roll and the big pops and you're in that slot area, then you've got to dive and create double space, and create those pockets of space for people to create, to take it, to keep the advantage. And we call that the 0-second offense. And then the drag is often the most open spot on the floor is where the ball penetrated from, particularly off dribble penetration. So if it's a baseline drive, then we need someone dragging in behind that, because all the defense will be geared to cover the drive and then cover the next receivers on the weak side. Who's covering the guy that drags behind the ball? And if someone does that, that means they can't cover the others if everyone's moved, because there's no way one can guard two if we have correct spacing. And so we work hard every practice. The first 30 minutes is about driving the ball, finishing the ball, creating space, never letting one guard two. And we work very, very hard. And I sent you some video on the very first clip in that video I sent you. That was not a called offense, and that was against the zone. And those players, I think if you count, I think there's 11 passes and 8 dribbles in total. And all 5 players touch the ball. And you see every aspect of what we're talking about, and we end up with a wide open shot.
It was fun to watch, and obviously these advantage shots that you're trying to create, and this 0-second offense. I mean, these D principles obviously apply to all of those things. Another thing is obviously your emphasis on reducing turnovers, and that's a big thing for you. Can you talk about some of the ways that you emphasize that within your team and within your practices?
Yeah, a big one. And I've been this way for probably even I was a player. When I was a player, I realised that the players that play off 2 feet generally made better decisions with the basketball. So we have a principle of what we call play off 2, draw 2, and that is to drive the ball. And if you're pressured, unless you absolutely think you have a uncontested layup, then I want you, to play off 2 feet. And because I just believe that if you play off 1 foot and jump, and there's some coaches who teach that, but I'm not one, and that's okay. But I believe if you play off 2 feet, then you immediately eliminate a lot of turnovers, because you can stop and make a good decision and use your pivots. maybe even get rid of the double team and end up in a one-on-one where you can pivot and take a one-on-one shot close to the basket, which I think is a high percentage shot. And I encourage players to do that. But then if there is a double team, you've got the chance to pivot and find one of these receivers. And that's the big one I'm big on is, and drilling all 5 of our players dribbling the ball, driving the ball, and then having to make decisions off that. And we do it in advantage, disadvantage situations at the start of practice, sometimes 3-on-4, sometimes 4-on-3, and that's just teaching the players to be able to pivot. And, and I think it's a real forgotten art in basketball is how to pivot correctly without traveling or making mistakes. And so we do a lot of work on that play off 2, draw 2. And we're saying we want to, the moment our pattern of our offense creates an advantage, we're finished running a pattern. We're now in D4 principles. You catch the ball. Before you catch the ball, you should know if you have the shot, not after you catch the ball. So that's a big thing we teach. And then you've got to make a decision. If you're not going to shoot the ball, are you driving it or passing it? And putting players in positions to do that. And, we do it from where the coaches play the defense to where they play the defense to where you have an extra numbered defender, which makes it a bit more difficult. And all of that just starts, and really a lot of turnovers are all up here. Particularly at the high level, everyone's got pretty good skills. And to me, don't put someone in a position in your offense that's going to put them in that turnover situation unless you're coaching them not to do that. And we do that with all our players. I think your 5-man needs to be able to handle the ball as much as probably not as good as your point guard, but he's got to be able to dribble the ball, because if he's a good 5-man, he's probably going to get double teamed anyway in the post. So can he dribble out of that for the moment and create a different advantage? And so we practice that a lot. But the big one is playing off 2 feet. You've got to play off 2 feet so you can then make a good decision from that. And it all comes down to that decision you make at the end of whatever it is you do.
Well, I love that concept and that phrasing. And other phrasing that I like is obviously an emphasis in creating deflections, turnovers, but you want your team to be in great flat triangles. So can you explain that a little bit to us as we shift to the defensive side?
Yeah, well, I'm one of these coaches who's probably about halfway through last year. I've always talked about flat triangles because that was something we were brought up with in Australia, and you look at the Australian teams over the history and the Australian players, they've always been pretty strong defensively, and the national teams from juniors through to the seniors, we've always been about pressing, and we always had this 1/3, 2/3 concept, 1/3 from your man, 2/3 from the ball, and we knew, it was sort of decided upon probably late 80s, early 90s, that if Australia was going to have any success in international basketball, what was physical toughness? It was our never say die attitude. It was our aggressive defense. And so a lot of things were done around that. And I've always loved the flat triangle and a big believer in, particularly it means you need to move as the ball moves to keep your triangles. And, the old point the pistols is the best way to do it. I'm yet to find, a better way to do it. Some people have given me some different things. I'm going, I still don't know that's going to help. And I know even now in Europe, some are even going 50-50, and not even 1/3, 2/3 anymore. And I remember Liam Finn talking about his time in, I think it was Israel he was at, and their coach, he actually encouraged the backdoor cut. He wasn't worried about that. So we want to be, and now with this peel switching concepts, which I've really fallen in love with, and it was only about mid last year I started to tinker with it. I really just searched the internet for everything, and we played around with it in our off season. And you really have to be in those flat triangles, and and be ready for that peel switch situation, whether it be a strong side or a weak side. And that also, by being in that flat triangle, I believe takes away the image of space. And as an offensive player, you're constantly looking for space to drive into. And offenses are being designed to constantly try and create space. In particular, the European offenses now, with all that movement and misdirection, etc. So with all this misdirection, then your players need to be great, in my opinion, on the flat triangles, because if they keep trying to follow their man around on all this misdirection, then that's going to create massive space for, the pick and roll diving, for the ball to be penetrated, for cutting, etc. And, I want to take that away. And we also need the flat triangles because most of our pick and roll defense is aggressive. We stunt, we hedge. We're not really a contain or a drops type defending team. So if we're going to be that aggressive team, then we have to be, up the line, and that's important for me with the flat triangle. And right now we're one of the better teams at forcing turnovers. The players are getting better at it, that even in transition, you should be in your flat triangle the ball, because we allow our plugger, the choice to go and trap if he wants, and that's important to me. That was something we did a lot of when I was at Perth with Rob Beveridge. We were an amazing pressing team, and the Wildcats have continued that on. Then when Trevor Gleeson came in, that foundation was there for Trevor's aggressive defense. And of course, the rest is history. They've won 6 championships in the last 10 years or whatever it is. And, all of that was predicated around these flat triangles, and which allows you to be more aggressive in the defense. And it also keeps the players proactive on defense. And that's a big thing. And I've never been a pack defense guy. And I've dabbled with it a couple of times, but it's just not the way I want to play the game. And so, the flat triangles have become a much bigger part of what we do.
Well, and again, a testament to you, this far into your coaching experience, and you're going to tagging up, and you're going to peel switching, and you're doing things that are going to help your players, and not just do what you're used to. And such an important part of this. Will Voigt, episode 64 of the basketball podcast, is when he talked about peel switching in depth. And Coach, maybe just a few of the challenges with teaching and using peel switching that maybe we haven't thought of if we haven't used it yet.
I think the biggest one is the hardest one is depending on where the ball penetrates from, whether you should come from the strong side corner or the weak side. And because if you come from the strong side corner and the ball is coming across the free throw line, then your next rotation is going to be really long. Both rotations are far too long, and you can guarantee you're going to give up a wide open shot in the corner. And, and I was always a guy, don't help off the strong side corner. You're just going to give up a 3. But one of our defensive philosophies is we want to try and, we call it pin to the sideline. Mm-hmm. So we want to try and pin the ball as close to the sideline at all times. And the closer to the sideline we can force catches, then the shorter the peel switch in the strong side corner. And the hardest part has been teaching the players, particularly the weak side defenders, to recognize when it's going to be their rotation and when it's going to be the strong side rotation. And that's a tough thing. So I do some drills where I'll start the guy in different spots up high, and we have the defender have his back to the ball carrier, and the ball carrier puts the ball on the back, and then he chooses to drive either way. And it's to try and help the players learn to make the decisions on where's the ball being penetrated from, and whose peel is it going to be. And that's been the biggest difficult thing. And Will talked about that middle peel, where so what happens when it comes to the middle, and that guy's a great shooter. What do you do? We're saying, sometimes we'll say, what, we're not going to peel from that high guy. We're going to peel from the low guy, because that's a difficult pass to throw the ball back once they cross the free throw line. So that defender now, who's defending the shooter, can peel to the corner, and the guy on the ball can peel to the shooter. And we've probably gotten, I don't know how, at least 1 or 2 steals a game from that, because of the angle of that pass now goes. That guy's peeling right into the passing lane. And that was something that Will talked about, that a lot of time your peel guys peeling into that slot passing lane, which was the pass that was becoming very prominent in a lot of the receiver principles, and that the peel switch takes away. And once you get 1 or 2 of those deflections or steals, you can see the anxiety that starts to build in some of the offense, and it's can be risky. But I truly believe if the players commit to it and they're 100% do it, then it can be done. And, we're still getting it right. We're still not there. And but I know that, our last 2 games we played Mikawa and they beat us by 12 in the first game. We just didn't commit to that side of our defense. The second game was unbelievable. It was like we had 7 guys on the court and we ended up winning by 26 or something. And, Mikawa are a very good team here in Japan and very talented offensive team, but they couldn't deal with it. And then the other thing I like about the peel switching is it creates tempo, and tempo is big for what we're trying to do on offense. So by taking some of these calculated, risky switches, it's creating tempo, and that's good for us. We're okay with that, and there's certain shots we're okay with. The other difficult thing I found with the peel switch is when the players start to just play for the peel switch rather than actually working hard on the ball. And that's probably been my biggest challenge. It was my biggest challenge last year. And towards the end of the season, we started to get better at not doing that, particularly when it's a pick and roll. We're very big on fighting over. So the player would just give up on it and just go for the peel switch. And that created no pressure on the offensive guy with the ball. And so that's something we're working hard at, that the peel is only there as a last resort. It's not the thing we do every time. And that's something that we've got to, continue to get better at. So we've started to do a lot more one-on-one work at practice and work on one-on-one footwork. And we talk about the player protecting his triangle, the guard your yard thing. And we talk about you got to protect your own triangle. And not opening your feet too quickly in the pick and roll situations, and teaching them how to get their arm and high foot over the screen so you're difficult to screen, and having more pressure on the ball so that it's not an easy decision. And we've found the peel switches to be far more effective when the offense is sped up and going at full speed, because that pass is a little bit different. But if the offense can go at the speed they want to, then the peel can become very dangerous.
So many things here. And you talked about speeding up and, pushing pace. I mean, you can see how these things all go together in terms of your philosophy. And it's really cool. In a really short time, we get a feel for how you guys play. And I've watched you, so I've had a chance as well. But one thing I just want to come back to as we wrap this up is this concept of building the culture together with the players. Because I'm imagining you are somewhat of an expert on this, having, again, crossed these cultural barriers and these different worlds, so to speak, that have helped you probably do this or experience this in a different way than a lot of us. So maybe can you share some of your insights on building this shared culture?
The whole cultural thing is something that's very Australian, really Australian. Everyone talks about culture around the world and team sports and business, etc. But in Australia, we worked really hard at that side of it, and it's a big thing. And I remember a great story from the Australian swimming coach and about the culture that the Australian swimming team had when they were basically ranked number 1 in the world. And they had a swimmer from overseas practicing with them, and he wasn't fitting into their culture. And so the coach headed down to talk to this swimmer. And as he walked into the change room, one of the Australian swimmers had this guy pinned against the wall telling him, hey, we don't do this here. You either start fitting into this or you can just get the hell out of here. And the coach said he turned around and knew he had great culture. He said that was when he realized that the players are enforcing everything about their program. And so it's led by the entire group. And that's what I'm trying to instill in every team I'm part of, is that you can't be one person standing at the top. And that's really different for Japan, because you've got this whole hierarchical culture of we do what the boss says. People don't leave work until the boss leaves work. You've got all these different things. But what I want to teach the guys is the most powerful thing and the easiest way you can do it is when you form a fist, if you got 5 fingers like this, it's strong. But the moment one thing's breaking out, it becomes weak. And together we can achieve so much. So we want this. And as I keep saying to my group right now, and this is one of the things we're trying to learn, and we're getting there, but it's still got some time to go. I can't be the only person driving this. If I'm the one getting angry all the time, then after a while, I become white noise. I'm just a noise in the background. And, you look at the coaching profession, most coaches don't last much longer than, if you get 4 years and in one situation in the professional world of coaching, that can sometimes be seen as a pretty good go. I don't want to be one of those coaches. I want to be able to go to a program where we build a program that others want to come and be part of. The players there really love playing and being part of that program. We form this culture that's a winning culture. And what's a winning culture? Just because your team might win on the scoreboard doesn't mean you have a winning culture. It's what you do every day. It's how you approach, so we're going to sit down and discuss together, what do you guys see as important in our culture? What do you think builds a winning program? And so together we came up with, a bunch of things that we believe. And they even talk about, like, we're owned by Mitsubishi Electric, which is one of the biggest companies in Japan and most powerful companies in Japan. Our training facility is right on the Mitsubishi Electric factory. So we have hundreds of people walk by our parking lot every day, and our players even talked about acknowledging those people, because they're the people that allow us to do what we love. And I talked about, imagine how some of those people, they're earning minimum wage, they're trudging to work for 8 to 10 hours a day, and they walk past our car park, and in our car park, there's a Maserati, there's multiple Mercedes-Benzes, there's Lexus, there's BMWs, you guys are getting paid all this money and they're out there flogging their guts. If we don't represent them the right way, we're actually doing wrong by them. It's so, and the players.
That's a powerful example. Yeah.
And, the lady who vacuums, our cleaner who vacuums the stairs, you need to acknowledge that person, because she's working her heart out and she's helping us have an environment that allows us to be our best. She's part of everything we do. And that has to be driven by every person, from our rookies through to our veterans. And every person has the right to voice this culture. And then we evaluate that. We have job descriptions for our players, we have our identities and themes, and we have our culture. And we evaluate this every 3 weeks. Are we living up to these? And I have different players run the session, so everybody gets used to speaking. And that's a challenge for some of our guys, particularly the younger players. But in time, and this is what I talked about before, I want to build something that's long-term. I don't want short-term success. I don't want to come in here, be lucky enough to win a championship in my second year, and then by year 4, I'm moved on. I want a long-term program, and that people want to be part of, and people don't want to leave, and you look at things like the Spurs and those types of teams, the Patriots, and companies where employees don't want to leave, and that's what I want to build. And I don't think you can do that on your own. You've got to have everyone helping to build that. And part of the reason I got this job was because a couple of my ex-players said, we want this guy to come in because he's going to change this culture. And that's true to our staff. I mean, we have I have a full-time interpreter. We have two managers, 2 training staff, a full-time strength and conditioning coach, 3 assistant coaches, an assistant GM. And, it's changing them too, and challenging them to change their standards, and to know that we're all part of this, not just the company, not just me, and it's got to be driven by all of us. And I remember our general manager, I sat down with him, who's been part of the club and the company now for I think, over 30 years. And, you know, and I asked him all these questions about the history of the club and all of that, you know, and I said, look, we don't have any history of our club here. Well, why not? We got to embrace all those things. And if you look at, you know, the New Zealand and Australian cultures in their national programs, they all embrace the history of the past. The All Blacks in particular is amazing to watch, the New Zealand rugby team, you know, and you see what they do. And you know, and I know the All Blacks have a system where everybody cleans their changing rooms. There's no cleaners. The players do that from the captain down. And I just think that subservient leadership is so important in building a culture. And that's something I drive. And our guys are really, really starting to buy into it and love it. And you see how much fun they have now coming to practice, how much fun they have been around each other, and that they understand hard work is part of what we do, but intelligent work is part of what we do. And they're getting better and better at it and keeping each other accountable. And I just know that at some stage this year, we're going to really roll on because we do have some good talent, because this is all going to bring this group so strongly together.
That's great stuff, Coach. We're excited to follow your team and your progress, and you know, we can all admire that desire to be able to build that long-term program and to be able to have that opportunity. So hopefully that is this stop for you. And thank you so much for sharing on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, and thanks for having me. And I hope the listeners get one little pearl out of all this, because, you know, that's something I enjoy about listening to the podcast. You don't always get a lot of information, but you get a little pearl that you can take away. And, you know, to use one from Zico Coronel, you know, he talked about the choke points to the offense. And I went, I love that. I love that. That moment where you've got to counter it. You know, and that was a beautiful little pearl that he threw out that I hadn't heard before. And I love those little pearls.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And Zico at this point is coaching in Japan too, along with a lot of other Australian coaches. So it's great. It's a fun league to watch, coaches, if you haven't had a chance yet. And Coach Dennis, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much.